Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You're going to use your cup?
yeah, challenge.
Everyone.
I forgot my
I found my bell yet. I know where it is. I think I know where it is.
I have one if you need it.
All right.
Little one.
So we begin as we always do at 9 o'clock with questions from the peanut gallery, which you are. So, what do we have coming from y'all? Yes, sir. Mr. Knuer.
I got a question from yesterday's.
Yes, sir.
Towards the end, we were talking about the 6th commandment.
Yes.
You mentioned that the only definition of adultery would only include
In the Bible. In the Bible. In the Bible, where the word adultery is used, where the apostles of, I won't even include the prophets, but where Paul, for example, talks about adultery, or where Jesus talking to the apostles in their recording about adultery, the thought in mind, or the activity, I should say, in mind, is actual intercourse. So, and your thought was?
Well, it seemed like you were implying that if someone were engaged in activity other than normal intercourse, it wouldn't be considered adultery.
I'm only saying that's what the Greek word means. It means coitus. It does not mean oral intercourse. It does not mean naked and patent. It does not mean any feeling. It doesn't mean any of those things. And it certainly, therefore, if it doesn't mean those things, it certainly cannot mean pornography. And my point is that we cannot say today, it is wrong for our pastors today to give either men or women permission to divorce based solely on the fact that they were caught with pornography. That's my point, and that's what's going on. That's what's happening. Families are being torn apart, and pastors are not working to repair marriages. When they hear that, it's just, well, good. We don't have to mess with that anymore. Send him packing or send her packing. Yeah. And I've even had it been told, or people I trust, pastors I trust have said about their fellow pastors that they're even giving permission for that if, let's say, you're going to a bachelor party and you go to a strip club, or you have a stripper in for a bachelor party, and the wife finds out about it. She comes to the pastor. She says, "My husband ogled a stripper," and some pastors will say, "They're done." I mean, I'm telling you, it's getting crazy. And so this is why I'm so adamant about it, that we've got to have a definition for this. We've got to have a definition. Now, I would be willing to have a discussion with somebody about oral copulation or anal sex or something like that. I would be willing to have a theological discussion with other pastors to decide whether maybe that also crosses the line. I would be willing to do that. I might even be willing to, look at a few other activities. But by George, we've got to draw a line someplace. This is ruining families. I'm telling you. I have a pastor friend who literally was thrown out of his house. And in this case, it was really sick because all he was looking at, he wasn't even looking at Playboy or whatever. He was looking at, in those days, this was years ago, Sears lingerie section, the catalog. Not the single circular you get, but the catalog. And he was browsing through that and having fun and life and now he admits and he admitted and here's the other kicker in this case that he had been addicted at one time to pornography, and early in his ministry, the two of them went to counseling, a Wells counselor, a counseling service counselor, Wells counselor, and worked it out. And she took him back. Now, in the old days, when we would discuss this in seminary or at Baptist conferences, once you do that, even if it's full on adultery, and you take them back, okay, you've got no grounds. Not even if he or she does it again with somebody else, because you have shown that you can deal with that. So this is the thing that's driving me nuts, is that, and the district president and the counselor and the circuit pastor all knew that this man had gone through this, had conquered this problem to a larger degree, and that she had accepted him back, and that he took a call, he went to another church, and he'd been there 10 years, I think, before this second incident happened. And then she got disgusted and drove off to another pastor's house, lived in his basement for a month, and in the meantime contacted the authorities or contacted church leaders and stuff like that, and got permission to divorce him and take his children away. And you know, it just, and I got a lot of pastors involved with this because he called me, and I've been helping him with his addiction. And he called me, and I got other pastors involved, and every single one of them agreed, without any contradiction, that this was wrong. But it turns out that when she went back up to Minnesota and started going to church, she fell in love with the second pastor, who happened to be single and who happened to be the son of the district president.
So it's all political.
Yes, in this case, I believe it was. But the problem with it is this gets out, and so again, when a woman or a man comes in and says, "I caught my wife or I caught my husband looking at XXX page whatever on the internet," good, fine, okay, well, you're done with him then. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bingo. And that's just wrong. Come on. And so we got to draw a line. And so I begin the line with intercourse, because that's what the Greek word means. Okay? And so at that point, again, if you want to have a discussion about various kinds, okay, I'll understand that. And I might even understand some other things too. And a lot depends on each situation. What is, you talked about desertion. What is desertion? People could make an argument that spending time at the strip club, especially if you're addicted to it or whatever, you're there 4 nights a week or 5 nights a week, till late, that's a kind of desertion. Okay, I'll be willing to discuss that, but I am not going to give blanket divorce privileges to anybody who walks in and just says, "Well, I caught my husband with a Playboy, that's it." I'm just going to say, "Sorry, babe, sweetheart, dear, that doesn't happen," or "Sir," as the case may be. Yes, sir.
Rebecca from online asks, but what about when Jesus says, "If you lust after a woman, you have committed adultery"?
That's true. That's spiritual adultery. That's a different word than when Jesus says we do not allow adultery or divorce except for adultery and desertion. When Jesus talks about adultery in that sense, when he's talking about divorce, he's talking about physical adultery. When he's talking about sin, what is sin, what's not sin, then yes, then lust is the same as hate in your heart. That's true, yes, that's true. But that's a different subject. They're not talking about allowances or exceptions to the lifelong part of the marriage commitment, which God allows. God allows those 2 exceptions. Paul says if the unbeliever or if one of the spouses leaves, let him leave. Let him leave. You are not bound. So you are not bound to your marriage commitment. You can get out of it. If he leaves, and then again, we can get into a discussion of what leaving is. You know, what does it mean, malicious desertion? Can you be maliciously deserted while you're still in the same house? Yes. That is possible. But there again, you're going to have to convince me, a man or woman, husband or wife with that situation, you're going to have to convince me that this is malicious desertion. And yes, are we going to make some mistakes? Yes, we are. Are we going to judge wrong in some cases? Yes, we are. But I'm not willing to add anything to actual intercourse unless I am convinced and can be shown in the Bible that that's what Jesus would include. And you're going to have a hard time doing that because that's just not the way the word was used. Now, you can say, well, they didn't have certain activities. That's not true. They did. All the activities of Sappho, all the activities of Lesbos, whatever, all those activities were well known, and all you need to do is look at the Kama Sutra that was written long before Jesus' ministry in India, and the same books written in the Middle East, and the same books written in China, and such and such, and in Japan, and so on and so. So there's no question that the kinds of activities other than full-on intercourse were certainly well known in humanity probably before books were written. As Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. So again, so you can't say that in Jesus' day they're just dumb and they didn't know that, oh gee, we didn't know you could do that. That's not true. Okay? That is not true. They knew full well you could do that, whatever that is. Leave it to your imagination. I need to be convinced before I will agree that pornography or other kinds of things equal to the adultery meant in the Scriptures. Okay? That's my point. Another point or question? Art?
Well, this morning, we was watching this preacher from the First Baptist Church down in Dallas. But that book. And he was kind of an advisor with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Says, when we're to pray for our leaders, what are we to pray?
What
You know
did
what he told me?
What did he say?
He said that they leave us alone.
Leave us alone. Well, yeah.
There's more to it than that, isn't there?
I guess, there is more to it. I guess that's a very simplistic way to look at it. That's like the rabbi, in Fiddler on the Roof, right? Is there a blessing for the Tsar? And the rabbi says, yes, may God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us. Church and state, they need each other in a manner of speaking. The state needs the church to keep people or to educate people in being good, in teaching them the commandments of God and in encouraging morals and all that kind of stuff. And the church needs the state to keep the barbarians on the other side of the wall. Okay? That's true. But other than that, their interaction should be very limited. So, I can see maybe what he's talking about there. Now, it's funny that a Baptist would say that because the Baptists believe part of their theology is to actually run the government. That's part of Baptist theology, is to take over and run they believe that the government should be run by the Bible. They believe the government should be taken over by Christians and run strictly by the commandments and stuff in the Bible. And that we should force our religion, if you will, on anybody else. And all you have to do to prove that is look at Calvin in Geneva. And when he took over Geneva, that's what he did. He enforced his brand of Christianity on everybody. You didn't have a choice. So that's kind of funny coming from a Baptist. But they can teach whatever they want to teach.
So, we should add to that, to give them wisdom or what?
Oh, sure. I think that when you're praying for our civic leaders, our state leaders, give them wisdom. Yes, I would say this. There is one thing that the government has been given to do, and only one thing that the government has been given by God to do, and that is to protect. That's it. There's not a passage anywhere in the Bible that government should build roads. There's not a passage in the Bible that says the government should have a welfare program. There's not a passage in the Bible that says the government should take over health care. There's not a passage in the Bible that says any of those things. And frankly, there's not much in the Constitution either. There's one thing and one thing only: protect us. Keep, as I say, the barbarians, our enemies, from coming in and killing us, raping us, burning our churches and houses down, and taking our property, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so that we might live a quiet and peaceful life under God, and also then to protect us from people inside the walls, inside the country, inside our states or inside our cities, who might want to rob us or kill us or whatever. That's it. Biblically speaking, that's it. Nothing else. And I didn't mention this yesterday. I should have. But again, this has very little to do, unless you really want to extrapolate it way out and get talking about all kinds of philosophical things. This has very little to do with keeping a refueling base in Qatar. This has very little to do with keeping two divisions tied down at the DMZ in Korea. This has very little to do with any of those things. Now, of course, you're going to find people that are going to say, again, as I said, well, better to do it out there than here. But again, I ask you, by what right, by what biblical right do we have to do that? We have no biblical right to go to those countries and say, we're going to put a fort here so that people attack here rather than back home in Alabama. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with the strategy. You know, it's good strategy, but it's not biblical strategy. That's my point. And as Christians, we ought to understand that. We ought to comprehend what God would like us to do, and what kind of policies in our government we ought to support and pray for. Whereas I used to in my youth, I used to pray for the American empire. Let it never fall, right? In my stupid youth. As I learned more and more, as I read more history, as I learned more about the Bible's view of government, and as I, again, learned more history, I begin now, I pray, bring all of our troops home. Every single solitary one. Keep our uniforms fine. Keep our fleets fine. Keep all our airplanes fine. I don't have a problem with that. No strong defense, no problem whatsoever. Maybe we should even have more Marines and more Army guys and more Air Force guys and more Navy guys and more machines and more battleships and more aircraft carriers. I don't have any problem with that whatsoever. But bring them all, 100%. Every single solitary one. I guess I would make an exception for the Marines that guard our embassies. But that's it, because that's sovereign soil. But other than that, I would bring every single solitary one of them home. I would have done that 25 years ago. But it took me a long time to learn that's really what God has in mind. And boy, I tell you, trying to get a point like that across when I was pastor in El Paso, next to Fort Bliss. We're here next to Fort Huachuca. You know. Oh, yeah, you might say, right? But I think you can still have the same apparatus. I think you can still have the same number of posts and the same number of forts and the same number of fleets and the same number of everything whole as if you have them scattered all over the place. I think. I don't see any reason why you couldn't. That's why I'm not want to put anybody out of a job. Not at all. Matter of fact, I think what the Pentagon has been doing the last few years has been wrong in giving a lot of jobs to civilians. I think that's a bad mistake. I really do. But I can't quote any Bible passage on that, so I don't get too involved in it. Okay? And my brief tenure in ROTC does not really give me a whole lot of expertise. Okay? So, another question?
I would like to know if anybody has ever seen a list of how many soldiers or military people the other countries have outside of their borders. How many German, how many French, how many English, all.
Well, the percentage,
They have outside their borders.
the percentage is very small. Yeah, it's very small.
But they don't show that.
No, it's very small. Most other countries, number one, they don't have the money to do that kind of thing. And two, they don't have the air fleet or ocean fleet to support that kind of thing. You need, the British found this out the hard way. The reason the British built a 450 ship navy during the Napoleonic Wars is they discovered that it's all fine and well to have an empire upon which the flag never sets, but you gotta get there. You gotta transport your troops, and you gotta get there, and you gotta feed them, and so on and so forth. And you can't do that if you get off the coast of France and your ship gets sunk. So you better have twice as many ships as the other guy has, so that you can get to your empire. They found that out the hard way, and it's the same thing with these other countries. You're not going to find these other countries having troops and forts and bases all over the place because they just don't have the infrastructure to support it.
But if they want something from another country.
Well, they'll do it, yeah. Russia,
They got enough.
sure. Russia sent a lot of stuff to Cuba in the early years, and Cuba would not have survived without Russian grain, without Russian medical supplies, Russian whatever, and American cars. But a lot of there's a big business. I don't know if it still is, but it used to be a big business that Russian entrepreneurs, shall we say, or other communist bloc people in South America too, did a booming business in American spare parts in the 60s and 70s, and gobbled them all up, and then funneled them through neutral countries to Cuba. And that's why when you go to Cuba, you see a 1950-60 DeSoto, it looks in pretty good shape. Because they got all those spare parts.
One dilemma I have is God is in charge.
Yes.
And what is his plan for this country?
Well,
That's what I wonder. Is he
if you look
gonna
at
cause our demise?
Yeah, if you look at history, as I do, and am doing, if you look at history, I think you've got a couple of possibilities. Right? You've got a couple of possibilities. There are examples in history of nations much like ours, in many ways, and I'm talking now history since Christ. Okay, so I'm talking the last 2,000 years. I'm not going back into BC times. It's harder to make comparisons. So in modern times, if you will call that, or the time after Christ, AD, there are examples of nations much like ours, very much like ours, lasting about 200, 300 years, and then going, right? Just internal collapse, external pressures, all kinds of things. There are also examples of nations like that lasting 500 years. Okay? So there's different possibilities. Okay? And one thing that's interesting to note, it has very little to do with their inner morality. inner morality. In other words, you could say the United States the morality of our society has certainly gone downhill. Certainly not. It's not biblical. It's not Christian. Okay, if it ever was. And I think that's an important point. Let's remember. Let's not think of American morals or Christianity in America as starting out, in 1776, way up here, and then going downhill. Let's not think of it that way. Let's think of it starting out down here, because most of these guys were deists, okay? In other words, they weren't Trinitarian Christians. And the reasons for their rebellion against King George were rather materialistic, rather worldly, frankly. That didn't have anything to do with religious freedom. Okay? Now, they're coming here, their ancestors coming here, yeah, 200 years before, yeah. But the revolution itself had very little theological or religious basis at all. Okay? So let's rather think of us as down a little bit down here. We'll put the chart like this. We weren't right at the bottom, but we weren't at the top either. And see our morality more, yes, the aggregate or average is downhill, but there have been some revivals in Christianity in our country. That's a much more accurate picture, right? And this is also true of a number of other nations in the history, in the last 2,000 years of world history. Okay? So, and again, some of them last 100 years, and some of them last 500 years. Not too many of them beyond that, but that's kind of the way it's gone. So now, what do their demise has to do with? That's a tricky question. The demise, when they finally go kaput, when they finally collapse. Well, and most of the time, what happens to these countries is they balkanize. In other words, they become smaller nations, and therefore obviously weaker nations, and maybe easier to govern, I suppose. There has been some talk about dividing the United States up into as many as 4 or 5 or even 6 separate nations, and it would be easier to govern and easier to get things done and so on and so forth. That might be true. I don't know. It's not a biblical question. But as to why the demise, okay, you can't always say it's for moral reasons. Sometimes God has another plan. In other words, He has a plan for another nation. And that plan, and again I'll say this, seems to require the demise of another one. Okay? Let's say, for example, just for sake of argument, let's say, for example, God has in mind for China to be the most populous Christian nation ever. Okay? Let's just say that for sake of argument. Just like He had in mind, obviously, to turn the Roman Empire to accept and support Christianity. Even though, as I said, in Diocletian's day, nobody could even imagine it. But that was his plan. Well, what had to happen in order for that to take place? Well, you had to have a whole century of bad emperors. And you really had to have the demise of certain sections of the Roman Empire in order to provide the impetus for Constantine to become emperor. There are other examples where, in order for a nation to arise, you had to have another nation decline. Let's say that, again, God wants China to be a Christian nation in the manner of speaking, and we support Christianity rather than oppose it. Let's say then He decides, well, we're going to further decline Russia so that China does not have to deal with that competition. That could happen. God, and we could say, and we wouldn't say, for example, well, Russia is more immoral, okay, than another country. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. You could make an argument that it's very religious nowadays. Almost everybody goes to church. And the Russian Orthodox Church is packed, okay? So you would say, wow, that doesn't seem fair. Same with Ukraine. But let's say God wants Russia to be a great Christian nation and causes the demise of Ukraine. You could say, well, that's not fair. Well, that's nothing to do with fairness. It's what's the goal God wants for where his own reasons, right? And so it could be, let's say, again, for sake of argument, that if he wants China to become this great Christian nation and be the source of gospel proclamation, as the United States was in the early parts of last century, I mean, we were sending missionaries all over the place, and they were, for the most part, good Christian missionaries. In other words, they were preaching what was in the Bible. They're not doing that anymore. But they were in the 20s, 30s, 40s, that. Okay. So let's say God wants China to be the one doing it, sending missionaries all over the place. Well, he could decide, well, let's make a decline for the United States. Let's divide the United States up into 5 or 6 countries. Let's have the federal government totally collapse. I'll let there be a civil war, a real civil war, not the fake one we had last time, but a real civil war, right? And so on and so forth. And that's possible, certainly. That's possible. And so when you look at history, Harry, when you look at history, you see these various options as happening. I don't think, based upon just if nothing else, we're on the anniversary of Roe versus Wade, the abortion decision. Based on that, more so than anything else, I have to say that from my view of history, that will be, or can certainly be, the cause of our demise. I believe, in looking back, I am more convinced of this now than ever. Think about, I see your hand, Bruce, I will get to you, okay? When people talk about the incivility of our politics, it is clear to me, as a historian, that began, or at least began to be exacerbated after Roe versus Wade. I think you can draw a real clear line. Yes, there were Democrats and Republicans before that. Yes, the guys that liked Ike didn't like Stevenson and vice versa, and so on and so forth. But when 73 comes along, and this opinion is put out there, you can see a real increase in the vitriol of both sides. You can see an increase in the vitriol of the pro-choice, pro-murder side, all right? In proclaiming this murder and so on and so forth, and really hammering it hard, and the other side, that this is the ultimate woman's right. And you cannot claim to be a supporter of women in any way if you dare don't support abortion on demand for any reason at any time. And the only thing that has happened since that time is that the divide has gotten wider, the two sides have gotten more entrenched, and our political discourse has gotten more fierce on every other subject. Because somehow or other they see every other subject as ending up with this one. Was it Arizona? I think it was Arizona this past week. A guy at the legislature that proposed a bill to label all, what's the word again? I just said it. Abortion? Yeah, but what's the word?
Roe versus Wade.
No, what's the word? What kind? For any reason.
Man.
Elective? Thank you. To make elective abortion, the perpetrators of elective abortion, to label them murderers. Now, that's not going to get anywhere in the Arizona legislature. But the fact that somebody had the guts to do that. But that's the kind of, I would tell that person, you can maybe do other things first, because that kind of language is not gonna get you any support from anyone, even people who agree with you. But I think that's a great example of the fact that our discourse, our political discussion, has gotten almost impossible. I mean, the two sides are not even in the same building. They're not even in the same block. They're not even in the same city. Okay? They're on opposite ends of the earth and trying to talk to each other. And there's just, I don't see any way. Bruce had his hand up first.
Going back to this about the country's demise and
Yeah.
stuff like that, I was taught in political science, yes, we had that in high school, that you'd be foolish to ever think the United States is going to be here in eternity.
Right.
It's like any other nation,
Right.
any other country. It has its ebbs and flows, and it will come up to a demise.
Right.
It will either be destroyed, taken over, but we also talked about God in my high school at that time. If you'd even read in the Bible, because they were quoting something about God's chosen people.
Yeah.
How long were they the chosen people?
Yeah.
Okay, things change. That's what we can. That's the only guarantee we have on life on earth is change.
That is so true. That is so true. But if you would tap the shoulder of any typical everyday run-of-the-mill American watching a 4th of July parade in 1955,
Right.
And said that, you'd probably get punched in the mouth.
Right.
Because for a lot of years, well, certainly after the Second World War, between the Second World War and Vietnam anyway, a whole generation grew up and a whole generation matured with that very thought in mind. We are eternal.
Right.
We are eternal, and we are God's chosen people.
Right.
And what's the song say? What does the song say? God has shone his light on us, right? That's what the song says, doesn't it? Right? And we think of ourselves as a favored nation. Well, let me tell you something, folks. The Khazar Empire was also a favored nation at one time. You know what? If you find 100 people and ask them where Khazari is, there's not even one that will be able to tell you even where it was. It was the most important empire on the face of the planet for a brief time. Granted, it was a brief time, but still, it was very important. Okay? So, you're right. Nations come and go like fluff, right? And like the wind. And if you read Solomon's Proverbs, if you read Ecclesiastes, and stuff, you look at the Psalms, you look at other various parts of Scripture that talk about that, the horse and his rider is thrown into the sea. Okay? Granted, the Egyptian Empire lasted, as far as we can tell, about 2,000 years. Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years. The Second Roman Empire lasted about 1,000 years. Of course, the Third Reich didn't last very long, but whatever. That happens. French Empire didn't last very long. British Empire lasted maybe 250 years. 300 if you want to really stretch it a little bit. Other than that, the rest of them are pretty short. So, Tony.
Yeah, I think, the United Nations, as I understood it, was started up to eliminate a lot of these skirmishes and bad people that are developing around the world.
True.
And somewhere along the line, it's gotten off that. I don't know what the heck they're doing, but I think to military support this organization, that it would be based like on population, and that company would, the country would provide a certain proportion to the United Nations. The United Nations should be the supreme army and overviewer of everything. And then we eliminate the nuclear problems that we got as far as the races that we have and things like that.
The problem with that is the whole structure of the United Nations. The whole structure shows the foolishness of democracy. Because everything in the United Nations is majority rules.
What?
Majority rules. And we're one country. Okay? And there are a whole lot of us that, for whatever reason, sometimes it's just simple jealousy, nothing else. Just, we don't like you because you got a lot of stuff. Okay? And so there's a lot more nations like that, and they vote against us for no other reason than they're just jealous they don't like us, and they like to slap us in the nose, you know, and they can do that at the United Nations. And so the United Nations will never, just like the League of Nations, will never, ever, ever, ever do what you're talking about, ever. It can't. Because all the little pipsqueak nations that are poor and ravaged and whatever, the only place they have any power, at one vote, one nation, okay, that's the place they have power. It's like democracy in the United States, okay? If you've got a city like Los Angeles that is 3 million people, and 2 million of those people live under the poverty line, okay, or live on the streets, what are they going to vote for? Are they going to vote for a cleanup? No. And for vagrants to be tossed out of the city limits? No, they're not going to vote for that. They're going to vote for free stuff. That's the problem. Okay? They don't like the people who live on the hill, looking down on them. They don't like that. They don't like the people driving through downtown LA with Cadillacs. They don't like that. They hate it. Okay? And they don't hate it because they hate the person. They don't even know the people. They're just jealous. That's all it is. It's pure jealousy. And so people in the ghettos, people in poor areas, people, you know, it's like people out here in the rural areas. People are all shocked sometimes when they hear, well, you know, these people are supporting kind of welfare. Okay, my father was president of the Farm Bureau for a few years, and during that time he was president of the Farm Bureau. His stance was no subsidies for farmers. Oh, wow. None. We don't work for the government. And there should be no subsidies for the farmers. If you can't hack it as a farmer, get out of the business. If you need the government to support the price of your milk, or support the price of your wheat, or support the price of your cotton, or your oranges, which they would never do anyway, because it's perishable produce, whatever, too bad. Or support the price of your cattle, too bad. If you can't hack a gallon business, if you're not a good enough farmer that you can make it on your own without the government's business, get out. Well, guess what? He wasn't reelected. And the next guy that came in was a big supporter of subsidies. And it wasn't too long after that. And his roommate for 2 years in college was the Secretary of Agriculture in the Eisenhower administration. He and my dad were on first name basis, and they used to talk back and forth. And the Secretary of Agriculture and he was replaced by Eisenhower because he was so unpopular. And I can't think of the guy's name, but he and my dad were very close friends. They went to ag school together. They're both farmers, and he was from California, but yeah, it was on subsidies, and so that's the same thing. If your opinion outnumbers another guy's opinion, you get your way every single time, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And so the little countries would never support a plan like that, ever.
That man also said that the Indian reservation was the most communist type.
Oh, yeah.
I can't think of his name.
Yeah, he did. He said the reservation system was the worst thing we could ever have possibly done to the Indians. But again, you say that today, you'll be scalped. Okay, we gotta get to Shia and Sunnis. Okay, let's finish that up. We can do that today. I am convinced. Shia Islam, bottom of page 37. The principal point on which Shia Islam differs from Sunni Islam, the majority of Muslims are Sunni, is by its tracing a line of religious authority from the Prophet through the descendants of his son-in-law Ali. But there is much more to the story. So that's the easy answer. What's the difference between Shia and Sunni? You can say, well, it's all over Muhammad's son-in-law Ali. Okay, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more to it than that. The Muslim today, Muslim holiday Ashura, marks the death of the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Imam Hussein, other spelling there sometimes, and the event that led to a schism between Shia and Sunni Muslims. Hussein, now you got to follow this, okay? Follow this. Hussein was the grandson of Muhammad, son of Muhammad's daughter Fatima, and cousin Ali. Okay, so Fatima marries Ali. Ali is the son-in-law. They have a child. The child's name is Hussein. So far, so good? Most Shia regard Hussein as the third Imam, Ali being the first, and Hassan, Hussein's older brother, the second. Some Shia sects, however, consider Hussein to be the second Imam and Hassan the first, because only they carried the blood of the Prophet Muhammad while Ali did not. It really doesn't matter very much because Ali was murdered while at prayer in a mosque anyway. So you got to understand that the Muslims want to, and this is not just Shia, this is both sides, really at the beginning kind of want to have a hierarchy that's in the family, in the blood. Okay. Now Ali is from outside. Ali is a son of Abu Bakr, okay, who's the right-hand man to Muhammad. Right? And that's important to know. Okay? But Ali is not, he does not have any blood of Muhammad in him. Right? He marries the cousin. Right? Now the grandson then, Hussein, has blood of the Prophet. So far so good. Right? You see, the governor of Syria had been battling Ali, the one who died, over control of the Muslim people since Muhammad's death. After the murder of his father, Hassan, again that's the older brother to Hussein, stepped in but had to continue fighting the Syrian governor, Muawiyah. The Syrian governor, so the story goes, paid Hassan's wife with gold and the promise of marrying his son Yazid if she would poison Hassan. So far so good? Right. Which she did. Hassan died and she married Yazid on the same day. Muawiyah declared himself Caliph, although many Muslims now recognize Hussein. Okay? So you got the grandson against the governor guy. The governor guy had the grandson's, her older brother, bumped off by his wife, okay, and then married that wife to his son, and then called himself the Caliph. Got that so far? So you've got Muhammad's relatives, okay, the bloodline of Muhammad that's being picked off. Okay? Meanwhile, the enemies of the bloodline of Muhammad are doing the picking. They're doing the killing. They're doing the poisoning, whatever. And so they are getting more power, and the bloodline is getting less power. Okay? The difference between Shia Imam and the Sunni Caliph is that the Shia consider the Imam to be chosen by God and should be a direct descendant of Muhammad. Again, a blood descendant of Muhammad. That's very important to them. The Imam is both the political and religious leader of Islam. So today, the Grand Ayatollah is Imam in Iran, and he runs the country, both church and state, mosque and state. The president of Iran used to be Ahmadinejad, okay, really has very little power. He can't do anything without permission or approval from the Imam or the Ayatollah. Same person, just different titles. Okay? The Sunnis, on the other hand, believe that the Caliph should be chosen as the one best to protect and promote Islam. So a powerful guy, smart guy, guy with lots of money, influence, and so on and so forth, right? And exercises only political rather than spiritual control. So if you're a Sunni, you have a Caliph, okay, who is only spiritual. He does not run the civil world. Now, you have a few in Sunni over there in Iraq who are trying to do both. But it's only, they say it's only because there isn't a political leader that can do what they need done. Although many Muslims speak of a caliph being elected, in point of fact, caliphs are more often chosen by force. So, in other words, the Sunnis say, look, if a guy is good enough to be caliph, then obviously he's got to be a good general and he's got to have a lot of army and he's got to, because then he proves to be a good caliph by being the guy who takes over. He conquers everybody else or kills everybody else that's in his way. Hey, therefore, he is the caliph. I mean, that's a very practical way to look at it. Most Shia believe in only 12 imams, and the coming of the 13th signals the end of times, the death of all non-believers, and the ascension to heaven of all true believers. Please understand that. All non-believers, all non-Muslims will be killed. All, 100%. Men, women, children, everybody. Okay? And we will all, depending on what Muslim theologian you talk to, go to hell or be annihilated or something. This is very dangerous belief of Iranian imam and president, both of them, the Ayatollah, the Grand Ayatollah, and the president of Iran, both believe in this bringing as quickly as possible the end of the world. They believe the time of the 13th imam is nigh and want nuclear weapons to hurry it along. The reason why countries like Pakistan want nuclear weapons is to be equal to the United States. The reason why Shia countries like Iran want nuclear weapons is to bring the world to an end. Totally different reasons. Totally different reasons. It's not for protection. They don't want to be protected from anybody. They don't really even want to destroy anybody, particularly. They just want to shoot off a whole bunch of them and bring the world to an end. That's what they want. Yes, ma'am.
But the world coming to an end will only happen when God allows it, no matter what the Shia do, correct?
Well, yes, but they feel that they are doing Allah's will by hurrying it along.
Well, I'm saying from a Christian point of view, it's going to be when God.
Right, Christians should think, we certainly don't want to support Iran's nuclear program, but at the same time, Christians should remember that even if Iran gets nuclear weapons, this does not mean the end of the world. Because, again, God is still in charge. The Israelis have had nuclear weapons for at least 30 years, probably 40. Pakistan, which is a Muslim country, has had nuclear weapons for about as long. India has nuclear weapons. They're a Hindu country. So you've got countries out there with very strange end-of-the-world scenarios in their religious thinking who've had nuclear weapons for a long time. And so far, China's had them since the 50s. Russia's had them since the 50s. French have them. The British have them. I forget how big the club is now. I think it's more than 20 nations. I can't swear to that.
Ukraine.
Well, all of
when the Soviet Union.
Yeah, all of when the Soviet Union broke, they all did. I think most of them though sent them back. I think that was part of the treaty that Yeltsin made with them. I believe. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that came out of the Soviet Union breaking up is we discovered a lot of documentation that showed that the Russians were a lot more willing to use nuclear weapons than we thought.
Yes. Well, and since then, our own documents that have been declassified have found that our commanders in Europe were very ready to use tactical nukes at the drop of a hat.
Well, when we went into Iran in the first Persian Gulf War, our tactical commanders had ordered to allow them to go to tactical nukes if chemical weapons were used against them, because we didn't have any response to that.
Right. I know. We most of us have very little, if any, idea what goes on behind closed doors in our nuclear arsenals and among our strategy makers and all that kind of stuff. I think if we did, we'd probably not sleep very well. But then again, as Kathy says, we have to always remember that God is still in charge, and He will only allow what He allows for His reasons. And however it might look to us, might look dastardly, it may look terrible, but again, He's only allowing it so the most possible number of people that can be saved can be saved. And that's always the bottom line. We need to remember. Harry?
I go back to our discussion about defensive.
Mm-hmm.
If Iran gets the atomic bomb or gets the bomb,
Mm-hmm.
and their goal is to end the world,
Mm-hmm.
would we be right in taking them out?
No.
We've got to accept them to end the
Like I
world.
said, like I said, plenty of our enemies, the enemies of the world, you could say too, have had this capacity. Now, just because their two leaders are dingbats, does that mean all the rest of the people are dingbats? I don't know. I frankly don't know. You know, I know for a fact that Christianity is growing faster in Iran than any place else in the world right now. As we speak, yes, right now. It's all underground. It's all underground and has no connection to the West. And has no connection with any denomination or anything. It's all just growing basement, churches, catacombs, we would call them churches, whatever.
How do we know that?
Certain individuals who have the ability to come and go from Iran report this on a regular basis. They belong to a group. If you want to follow them, it's called Sheep and Wolves, I believe, on Facebook. I don't know if they have outside of Facebook, but on Facebook, Sheep and Wolves, or Wolves and Sheep. It's one or the other. There is a site you can go to, and you can follow the progress of these people. And it's fascinating. I don't know who's bankrolling them, but they've got a lot of money because they produce a lot of very nice documentaries and videos and things about their work in Iran.
How does Iran, Islam, allow them to exist?
You would like to find them and wipe them out. It's underground.
And if they're on Facebook? I mean,
Yeah, but they don't say it. They don't say it. Oh, by the way, we're at the corner of 9th and 14th Street. No, they don't say that.
That fellowship at,
Yeah, right. Yeah, please bring donuts. Yeah, no. It's very much underground. Very much. Like the Orthodox Christians in China. The Orthodox Christians in China are very much underground. Very much underground. And it's hard to find out where they're meeting and all that kind of stuff. The Orthodox, or the acceptable Christians who accept China as the government as their rulers, kind of, and make decisions for them, they have churches, they're above ground, but the house churches, they're underground. And yeah, China would like to wipe those out too, very much, very much.
we had a member of church up north who was in China working with those type of underground activities.
Are we growing any more in China?
Yes, still, oh yes, yeah. From what we can tell, again, people that can come and go, we believe we're even there's even a pretty strong underground Christian church in North Korea. There are North Korean Christians, there are Chinese Christians, there are Christians in Saudi Arabia, under hiding, most of them. There are Christians in Pakistan, hiding. Our church in India is doing really well. I mean, we're converting a lot of, not a lot of Muslims, but a lot of Hindus.
Pastor Gergel was back and forth there.
Okay, going on. After the death of the Syrian governor guy, his son Yazid declared himself caliph and continued to fight Hussein for control. Yazid was much more powerful than Hussein and chased him out of Mecca. Hussein fled towards Kufa in Iraq, but he never made it. He had only about 70 people with him, mostly family and many women and children. He was caught by Yazid's forces. He and his men were killed and beheaded, and the women and children were taken as slaves. His death at the Battle of Karbala is remembered as on the holy day of Ashura, usually with bombs, assassinations, and widespread murder. That's some celebration, eh?
Really? Maybe wait till next year.
The violence will occur whenever there are Shia and Sunni populations living in close proximity to one another. There have been many caliphs, but only 12 imams, according to Shia. The Sunni don't see it that way. In the Arab tribes, when the leader dies, the tribal elders meet in a surah to choose a new leader. That leader does not necessarily have to be the son of the deceased. The elders will opt for strength and wisdom over bloodline. The Sunnis insist that this is what Muhammad expected, since he was a member in good standing of the Bani Hashim desert tribe. The Shia, on the other hand, say he chose Ali as his successor, and all successors must be chosen by their predecessors that be direct descendants of Muhammad. It was over all this Ali, Muawiyah, Hassan, Hussein, Yazid business that the schism between Sunni and Shia became permanent, and they have continued killing one another throughout the century. So it has nothing to do really with theology. It's not like Protestants and Romans. It's not like the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It's not like the 30 Years' War. It's not like, different groups of, Presbyterians arguing with one another or whatever. It's not over anything having to do with the Bible, the Quran, or anything like that. It's over who has control. Who's the boss? That's all it's over, nothing else. And yet, you hear these people, you read their diatribes against each other, they condemning each other to hell all the time, and saying that, they're not true Muslims. We're true Muslims, not you guys. And the other side says, no, we're true Muslims, not you guys. So they make it a theological point, even though it's not a theological. It's crazy. To keep things as confusing as possible, there were caliphs and imams operating simultaneously and in direct opposition to one another. For instance, the first three caliphs are not recognized by the Shia. The Shia and Sunni both recognize the fourth caliph, Ali, who was also the first imam, although the Shia consider him to be the first caliph also. Then there were the warring dynasties that fought one another all over North Africa, Egypt, the Holy Land, Spain, and the Arabian Peninsula for the last 1,400 years, or ever since the death of Muhammad. Each claimed to have its own caliph, or to have a rightful caliph, imam, or emir. Actually, the title caliph became more honorary than effective about 800 years ago. The Ottomans in Turkey tried to revive it for a time, but was finally abolished by Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey, and is defunct today. If you want to read a very interesting biography of a man who can explain, or his life can explain a lot of what's going on in the Middle East today, find a biography of this guy right here, Kemal Ataturk. There are a couple of them out there. There's one that was written just a couple of years ago. I read it. It's very good, very explained, very clearly what's happening in the Middle East based upon his life. He was very much quite a character. He was a tyrant. He was a despot. He was a megalomaniac. But a lot of what's going on in the Middle East today can be traced right back to Kemal Ataturk. I mean, good grief. He named a country after himself. Today, the Sunni claim to manage their affairs by means of the ulema, a group of Islamic scholars, clerics, and religious specialists in whatever country they can control. The Sunni political leader of the country must be subservient to the ulema, except when he's not. Like, as for example, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Yemen, etc. That's the program, even if it doesn't work well. So in other words, they say officially, well, the ulema, they decide. But the fact of the matter is the royal houses decide and cajole the ulema to go along with it. The Shia, on the other hand, believe the Grand Ayatollahs are the spiritual and political leaders of the religion in the countries that they control, which right now is pretty much just Iran. This view by the Shia is probably closer to reality in Shia-dominated countries than the Sunni ulema in Sunni-dominated countries. As, for example, if Ayatollah, the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei of Iran, wanted to get rid of the president, he would simply do so. And he did that after I wrote this. So I had to put the president's name in. And if Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, who's now dead after I wrote this, in Iraq said civil war, then civil war would be. Thus, if and when we go to war with Iran, we had best have al-Sistani or one of his successors on our side, or we'll have to fight on 2 or more fronts at the same time. The point of all this is to emphasize that from its inception in the hearts and minds of the followers of Muhammad through 1400 years of history and up to today, the great caliphate that you hear people talk about, so wistfully spoken of by the likes of Hamas and others, was a myth. It always has been a myth. It never, ever existed. Indeed, it appears that the only people that Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims hate more than they hate Americans, the Jews, and the British are each. They've killed many more times more of each other than they have of anyone else down through history. I mean, you can take a dozen 9/11s or more and find examples of that kind of slaughter of one side against the other. That 3,000 dead in one day in New York and Washington, to a Shia or to a Sunni is like, big deal. These guys crying about it. Yeah, it's not even a drop in a bucket. We've done that to each other in 1 hour. Come on. Yeah.
We don't have a population problem.
No.
Well, with the imams, they're supposed to be 13.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, as soon as one dies, they get a new one.
No.
Because there was a big gap in there, wasn't there?
Yes,
Because
there's
otherwise,
lots of gaps.
okay, so they have some.
Well, they have to decide who's a bloodline of Muhammad and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they have to, figure that all out. And by now, after 1,400 years, the bloodline of Muhammad is all over the place. So yeah, it's very hard to follow now. Yeah.
I thought that one of the worst blunders this country made is when they went into Iraq. They should have let them alone and let them fight each other. That was a good deal.
Well, I think you can take it a few steps back, because the blunder I think we ever made is not to find a different homeland for the Jews after the Second World War. Not that they may not have accepted it, but that was a possibility. There was a very brief window of opportunity where the Jews basically came to the world, the United Nations, and said, we would like to have a homeland. Okay? And if you don't find us a homeland, we'll go back where we came from. So there's a possibility of finding them another homeland someplace else in the world. And nobody cared enough to do it. And again, I'm not sure that they would have followed if somebody would have said, hey, your homeland is in the mountains of East Africa, or whatever. But we couldn't find any nation out there who would take them in and let them basically take over their country and be the country. I can't say as I blame the rest of the countries of the world, but when the rest of the countries of the world were pretty much destroyed at that point, and the only people with any kind of power or any kind of influence were the United States, Russia, basically that's it. We really missed the boat. But to allow them to go back to Israel or to Palestine and literally take over people's houses and properties and just confiscate it. That was a bad mistake. Because when you allow something like that, you allow people to come in and just confiscate property and don't pay you anything for it, right? I mean, they didn't buy it. They just said, "This is ours now. Get out." And that's going to stick with people for a long time, generations. And I think that people didn't think. There were people living there already. Goodness sakes, it wasn't like the place was a deserted land. There were people living there. People had their grapevines and their fig trees and whatever. Okay, it was poor and it was disheveled and it wasn't run very well. But hey, they were still living there. If you're going to do that, at least pay them. They didn't even do that.
Why?
Yeah. Bruce, real quick.
Well, because you're talking about World War II. Look at what was done in the 1800s with the Indian Territory.
Oh, yeah. Same thing.
We did the same
Same
thing.
thing.
So therefore, when we did what we did at the end of World War II,
We were just following what
Yeah.
we were censored.
Yeah. And that mistake just got doubled.
We don't learn, like the
No.
Jews don't learn.
Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all.